Welcome to Fade to PB8. In today's episode, we'll be doing a bunny that's on the edge of a forest. And what I've done, unlike my other videos, is I have included a final image of the bunny off to the right on the screen, so you can compare what it looks like during the coloring process versus what it looks like after the coloring process. And overall, this one turned out really nicely, so I'm really happy to share. Now, the biggest challenge, this was actually a very challenging one, and I think the hardest challenge was kind of knowing what to do with the depths of the forest. Like, do I make it a dark forest, or do I just have it so there's a couple scattered trees and you can have the sky in the background? I ended up going with the former, and that's having like a dark forest. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of coloring in the trees just lightly, and I'm just getting an idea of what I want things to look like. I'm going to end up coming over the trees again later, but these drawings, they get easier as you make progression. So the more things are colored in, the easier it becomes to color the remaining objects. And that's one of the reasons I usually save the main character or the attention point for the very, very end, because I like to be able to compare the colors that I'm using for that main character, compare it to the colors that are already down on the paper. And I find the images just turn out a little bit better that way. I know it's like, it kind of, you might, if you screw up on the bunny after you've done all the other work, do I throw out the whole picture? Do I ruin it? But I think it's safer to save the bunny for last. So for these trees, like I said, I go over them a few times. Now I'm using 80-pound paper, and with 80-pound paper, you can probably do maybe 10 to 15 layers before the image gets fully saturated. So I probably went over them 4 or 5 times, the trees. And that's just to give me a good idea of kind of what I want this to look like. Because at this point, I still don't know. Do I want that forest to be, deep and dark green, or do I want the light to show through? So I'm still making up my mind on that right now. But grass is grass, so we can knock that out. And you'll notice I've selected quite a few markers up top. And really what I'm doing is I'm just kind of scattering them around. I start with the light ones. And I've basically got 2 or 3 different palettes going. And most of my greens, like the leaves, the bushes, and the grass, they're all going to share a lot of these same colors. So I pick out my palettes ahead of time. You can see I did that for the rabbit and the environment, the trees. But for the vegetation, I kind of just have all my greens out, or a lot of them. Now, one thing I want to note is that whenever you have a line on one of these drawings, it usually indicates some sort of color change. Now, to the right of the bunny, there's a squiggly line that goes through the grass, and I wasn't really sure what to do there, so I ended up just making it a little bit darker around that squiggly line, as if it indicates some sort of change in the grass, or I'm not really sure, but I didn't want to just go over it and pretend that it doesn't exist, because you're still going to see it in the very end. So if you look at the final image, you can see I just kind of went over that squiggly line with a darker green, and I think that's about the best I could do with it. Now you'll also notice that I am going over all the grass and all those plants in the grass, and there's a couple reasons why. Number one, it would take a lot of time to go through all the leaves, and as I'm going around all the leaves and individually avoiding it, the grass will start to dry, and I like to work with wet ink. So, and the second reason why I'm doing is I just chose that I'm going to go with a darker color, so I can use all those common greens for the grass and the plants, and then come in later for those plants with the darker green, which is what I'm doing right now, and I think it turns out really nicely. You want to avoid being monotone, so that's why I kind of scatter a lot of different colors together, and I think that just gives the grass a more natural look. If it were monotone, it would look like he's standing in a parking lot that has grass on it, a very flat surface, and we don't want that. Now for these bushes, I'm basically using a lot of similar colors, but I'm not going to be using the yellow greens like I did for the grass, and I'm going to be throwing in a couple blue greens. So my light source is kind of the top, is basically the sky. So I'm going to have my light source pointed towards the center, the upper center part of the page. And I start with my light colors and I work my way dark. I pretty much always do that. There are a few exceptions, but 9 times out of 10, I'm starting with the lightest marker and just progressively getting a little bit darker and darker. Now what you can do is, well, let me back up. The reason why you don't want to start with your darkest marker is that once that color's down, it's going to dry up pretty quickly. And once it dries, it's kind of hard to fix. So we want to apply darker markers to a wet area of the page, and that'll give us a little bit more time to work with it, a little bit more time to maybe make corrections, change the color, even go lighter. You can do that with light ink, but once the ink dries, you really can't go lighter. So that's why I usually save the darker colors for last. Now, I'll be jumping back and forth between a lot of greens and blue greens. I might go really light, then I might hit the dark spots, and I might go light, but I'm kind of just jumping back and forth. And I'm switching my markers every single time. So I might have like 3 different light markers. I might have 3 medium markers, 3 dark markers, and they might be greens or blue greens. So I'm jumping around a lot. I'm really trying to avoid just like a monotone color, even like a steady gradient. It just doesn't look as natural. And look at the final on the right side of the page of the screen. And you can see traces of blue greens kind of as it transitions from the light to the dark. And I think introducing a new color that's not too far off to indicate the transition from a light area to a dark area turns out really nicely. So now I'm doing the background, and this is what had me worried the most. So I've grabbed a couple normal greens that are have a little bit of grayish to them, and I just scatter them around. Then I grab my green grays, and I start light, and I'm still just kind of scattering them around as if it's camouflage. And then I come in with my darkest green gray on wet ink, and I give the indication that there are some trees in the background. So instead of the bark of those trees being like a dark brown, it's going to be a dark green, and it's going to be covered with an even lighter green gray. And then I just kind of go over it. I blur it all together. Keep in mind like what the focal point is and like how far away it is from you. This is way off in the distance, so it's not going to have a lot of detail. It just has to blend in and bring everything together. So I think the biggest challenge of this entire drawing was, well, what I'm doing right here is I'm doing the top half of the trees. Now I normally say do all of one section at one time, and that's because it's easier to work with wet ink. And if you're doing half of a section at a time and then you come to another section, you kind of have to remember those same steps that you took in order to achieve that result. So here I'm kind of breaking it in half just because it's such a large surface area. So the real challenge for me was how do I connect the background with those the blank areas that you're seeing right now with the trees in the front that I'm coloring in right now. And because by the time I finish, what I end up doing is I finish the top of the trees and I take a break. I was actually pretty exhausted at this point. I put a lot of work in. And then how do I get that blank area to match, to fade in so well? So what I end up doing is I'll use a lot of those same greens I'm using right now, but I'll also combine them with those green grays that I had from before. And then when I come over, since all the ink is dry up top, I will still just throw in some of those greens as I'm applying them to the blank areas. So I'm just adding more colors to the top section that are shared with that middle section. I don't think I bring green grays into the top, but here I'm going to get going. And so I start with the green grays, and I'm going to create some sort of a fade that gets a little bit darker as you get further away from the bunny and deeper into the forest. But then I'm going to bring some of those colors up because all the colors up top are dry now. And you really want to note that when the colors dry, they get lighter. So it's kind of hard to match colors, like new colors, with ink that's already dry. It's much easier if all the ink is wet, because then they'll kind of dry uniformly. And if you're not really sure if it's uniform, what you can do is actually flip over the paper, and you can kind of see how saturated different sections of the paper are. Generally, you go a little bit slower around lines, and because you're going slower, the ink flows more, and so those parts get more saturated. When you have an open area, like let's say parts of the grass, it might not get as saturated, so sometimes you have to go over those parts 3 or 4 times to equal how saturated the paper gets. So here you see I'm just bringing those colors together, kind of jumping back and forth between the green grays and the normal greens. But when I'm bringing in these greens, I'm throwing some up top to the dry areas because I want them to make it look like it goes together. That's the ultimate key. How do I get this wet ink to blend in with this ink that's already dried up there. That's a little bit lighter than it's going to show when it's wet. And I think I actually did a pretty nice job here. So I'm very pleased with it. And then what I'm going to end up doing is actually going over some of the trees in the background with a very light green. And then I'm going to go over the trees again and just make them all a little bit darker, bring the shadows out a little bit more. So yeah, here I am going in with the green over the trees just to bring them all together a little bit. This is a very, very light green. You're really not going to notice it too much, but at the very least, I'm just getting the ink wet right there, and then that just helps me. I like wet ink a lot. I think it's a lot easier to blend. It's a lot easier to work with. So even though I brought on like a very light green that you're really not going to see, it's still just got the paper wet, and that's a good way to start any section, is with a really light color just to get it wet. And you're also, like I said earlier, you're just molding it like a piece of clay. So I'm never really going for that final color right away. I'm always giving myself options like, can I make this part darker? Can I lighten this area, or even just completely change the color? So those are things you need to practice and just be aware of, because this whole drawing probably took me 4 or 5 hours. And yeah, I made some mistakes. I made some mistakes on the bunny too. And actually one of my markers ran out of ink while I was doing the bunny, which kind of put me in the panic mode. And I normally have a lot of backup markers, but in this case I was running out of this one particular one, but I still made it work. Now, keep my light source kind of to the right a little bit, behind my shoulder and to the right. Antlers are pretty straightforward. Just I've got some yellow greens mixed in, or yellow grays mixed in with some light browns, and I think it comes out real nicely. You can use that blender marker to lighten up certain areas. That helps make it pop a lot. The blender markers, I really wish that they gave you more than one blender marker per set, because they're so useful and you can go through them so much. Now for the rabbit, I've basically got 2 different palettes going on. I've got these light grays, which I'm applying first, and I'm just going to do some basic shading, and then I'm going to go in with the browns. Now, if I were to go back and do this again, I don't think I would have hit all the grays at first. I think I would have gone like the lightest gray, then the lightest brown, then the second lightest gray, then the second lightest brown, and so on, and just work my way to the darker colors. My original goal was to have the belly be a bit more white, but I started to panic a little bit when my marker started running out, and it wasn't turning out exactly as I envisioned it. But you know what? I think it still looks really nice in the end. So just because something doesn't come out exactly the way you want it to, it doesn't mean it's going to look bad. And you have to think about like what the object is, or in this case, an animal. Can the colors change and it still looks good? Can this bunny be gray? Can it be brown? Can it be black? Can it be blue? Well, probably not blue, but the first 3 colors it probably can be. So, give yourself some some room for error. Just note that you can change the colors if it's not going the way that you want it to, and it can still look really nice. So I'm basically I'm going like the dark as I usually do, and it's a large surface area, so I'm just trying to keep everything at least a little bit damp. And now that I've got all my colors applied down, and basically my job right now is just to kind of blur things together. And what you can do is come in with a lighter marker and use it as a blending tool, and that usually works out pretty nicely. So the light markers, you end up using them a lot more, even though you don't really see the colors in the end. You can use them to start and just get things wet, and then and then you kind of use it to form your image into your final result. Not really going for that final color, but then once you've applied the darker colors, the light markers become really useful for blending things together. And these ears were pretty simple. I have 2 palettes selected. One is kind of purplish colors, the other one is red colors. And it's a pretty simple fade, so I think right there I'm going to call it good. Now, you might have seen earlier I was using a hairdryer and just putting some weight on top of it. That's to help prevent it from warping when it dries. And that concludes today's drawing. I hope you learned something. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did you like how I left that image of the bunny, the completed image, in the right-hand corner the whole time? Or would you prefer that I keep that out? Let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.